A new and perhaps a final Senate intelligence report says the Russians did attempt to interfere in the 2016 election on behalf of President Donald Trump. The question this time around for Bill Whittle on this episode of Bill Whittle Now is, how do we know when it's Ruski interference? I'm Scott Ott, and Bill, it's beside, this 1,000-page report, and there was bipartisan agreement on the major conclusions of it. The report did not come to a conclusion about collusion, so to speak, between the Trump administration, although it did suggest that Paul Manafort was in close contact and sharing information with a guy who is now identified as a Russian intelligence officer, previously just said he had connections. But in any case, I don't really want to get into he said, she said, and what happened there. But it occurred to me that it seems like there's broad agreement on the fact that Russians are intentionally trying to interfere in U.S. elections. We are vast consumers of information. Bill, is there any way that the average person, or even you, can know when you're being manipulated by Russian intelligence operations and whether you're just reading something crafted by a red-blooded American?
Why are you asking me that? I mean, right.
Where
at this
are your
moment,
loyalties?
with the convention going on? Look, some people get the vapors over this, that the Russians tried to interfere in the 2016 election, but this is going to come as a great shock to them. They also tried to interfere in the 2012 election, the 2008 election, the 2004 election, the 2000 election. You can walk this all the way back to the 2000, I would say the 1920 election. Because that's when the communist state in Russia that's the first election after they started.
So how do we know we're not just pawns in their big game?
Well, we'll get to that. The other shocking news is going to be, I'm sure, that the Chinese are also trying to influence the 2020 election. And I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, if the Brits, the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Iranians, and everybody else wasn't trying to do that too. So what that ends up leaving us with is what's on the table. And I just wanted to get the other players in there because somehow it's not like this is a mystery. The Democrats have been playing this like this is the first time in history and everything would have gone just exactly according to plan and Hillary would be president now if it hadn't been for those meddling Russian kids. But this is the one of the pitfalls and dangers of living in a free society. And that is since you are allowing the people to select the government, which shockingly enough still appears to be the case within certain boundaries of cheating, nevertheless, it still appears to be the case. Donald Trump's election is evidence of that, certainly. When you are willing to allow the people to select the government instead of the other way around, this opens up the possibility that the people can be deceived. And as we live in an age where we're more and more connected by information that I'd like to refer to as inside the frame, in other words, stuff that is sent to us as true rather than stuff that we either perceive with our own eyes or heard from lifelong trusted associates, it does up the level of influence. And furthermore, we also live in an age now where techniques that were developed in advertising, techniques that were developed in propaganda before advertising, any number of extremely subtle forces are in effect here. So yeah, this is definitely happening, and it's definitely significant, and it could conceivably also be a game changer. I would like to say, however, for the sake of perspective, that the foreign influence on the information the Americans get in order to determine who they want to vote for as president is insignificant. It's absolutely just a shriveled little nubbin of the amount of information distortion that goes on by our own liberal press corps here in terms of setting up a lovely tailwind for Democrats.
I guess, Bill, we could expand the inquiry to that level, but I think by examining it in the micro, you get the effect of the macro anyway. I guess, what I'm thinking is we, consumers of news, for example, or readers of social media or watchers of YouTube videos, believe that we are free actors in a free society. We believe that we are making dispassionate judgments about information that comes before us, using our historical reference points as well as indicators about the truth or falsity of any given message. And yet, I guess you have to ask yourself the old Latin phrase, cui bono, who benefits? And essentially say of the Russians, for example, what do they want? And is that what I'm doing? For example, if Russia wants division in American society and one neighbor tearing another neighbor apart over political ideas, and I'm doing that, am I doing what the Russians want me to do unwittingly?
Well, yeah. And while you were phrasing the question, I again came back to the fact that what Russia wants you to do as a voter and what Russia is able to do to influence you as a voter is utterly insignificant compared to what Google wants you to do as a voter and what Google can manipulate you into doing as a voter. As an example, if you're watching this on YouTube, and you probably are, at least embedded in one way, you'll see that we have something like 160,000 subscribers listed at Bill Whittle channel on YouTube. But these videos consistently get seen by somewhere from 10 to 20,000 people usually, which is considerably less than a tenth of that. So it makes you wonder why, with 160,000 subscribers, we are consistently getting less than a tenth of that number watching the show. And the reason is because Google has decided that this program is not in their interest. It's not in their interest to have people thinking critically about things. It's not in their interest. Russia's motives are transparent compared to Google's motives, but nevertheless.
But Bill, I don't think your argument holds up. I don't think that follows. And here's why. Because people who practice emails, even to opt-in email campaigns where people have said, I want to receive this email, and they've confirmed that they want to receive that email, most of our viewers probably know, yeah, at one time or another, I asked to receive an email from a certain company, and I don't read most of the emails that they send me. And it's not because of any nefarious blockage going on by some algorithm. It's just I don't have time, or that headline didn't interest me, or whatever.
I disagree. I spend a significant amount of time looking at pop culture sites and at gaming sites, and the numbers on their videos seem to be holding at about a third of their total subscription base, sometimes higher. In other words, non-political comment, non-conservative commentary, anything else really, the number of views on the individual video is much, much higher as a percentage of their subscriber base that's listed right there on their page than it is for us or for any of the other conservative outlets out there. So what Google has said basically openly, and what more importantly, what a former Google employee has leaked, is that Google has basically said, if we shut down a channel, then we get hit with the whole censorship thing. And the only thing I think Google and Facebook and all the rest of them really fear is genuine legal intervention on the part of the government. And so what they do is they say, well, instead of just shutting it down, we'll just make sure nobody sees it. We'll make sure that it doesn't get in front of anybody's eyeballs, which serves a secondary purpose, by the way. Number one, it makes sure that nobody hears the message that they find to be antithetical to their plans for domination of human minds across the planet. But it also has a secondary and maybe even more important effect, and that is it discourages the content maker. I'll never forget the conversation I had with Alfonso Rachel, where he was just utterly had the wind knocked out of him. And I've been in this situation many times, where he says his friends think he's disappeared, dead, off the scene. How come you're not doing any more videos? He says, I'm doing videos every day. Well, I'm subscribed. I never see them. So when you ultimately ask the question, Scott, you used a little Latin, so now I will retaliate. When it comes to information shopping, it really is caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. It's the responsibility of the viewer to do some sort of fundamental mental due diligence on something that has some importance. I don't do that if I'm looking at a cat video, but if I'm looking at a video from somebody who's making extravagant claims, if they're making extravagant claims that that run counter to my existing beliefs, I actually give that more weight and spend more time on it than I do on somebody who's making extravagant claims that support my belief, because usually my experience has been those are almost never true, because I want them to be true. And so it's just a question of accepting the fact that you have been granted the franchise, that people who came before us had assumed that you as an adult were responsible enough and careful enough to handle that responsibility seriously. And in the age of the internet and social media, the number of influences on that vote is infinitely greater in number and infinitely greater in power. However, we also have, on the other side of the scales, we at least can say that at the very least we have access to a different side of the story. We may have to go looking for it, but at least we have access to it. And that is why we're still in the game. If the internet weren't here and all we had was CNN, for example, Donald Trump would never have been elected. We'd be in Barack Obama's fourth term now, and on it goes. So you just have to be careful. But I still find it hard to believe, to be perfectly honest with you, that the Russians really would have preferred Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. I just don't believe that. I really don't.
Well, and maybe, Bill, and this, I get back to the core of this, because I'm not really concerned over, whether they had the resources to bring about the conclusion that they preferred, if they had a conclusion that they preferred, but that in general, it's in the interest of Russia to keep the United States at odds with itself.
That's it.
To tear down the country itself. And I guess, I have to ask myself, when I'm getting lathered up about somebody who has different political views than I do, and I go over the edge on that beyond just arguing the facts and begin to question their sanity, their mental acuity, their moral fiber, and other kinds of things, or their objectives, maybe I'm just falling into the hands, whether Russia got me to do it or not. I'm doing Russia's bidding, even without realizing that I'm doing it. And if you take Russia out of the picture, I still think it's pretty unhealthy for a republic.
Absolutely. Now we're really onto the main vein, because when people talk about Russian influence trying to swing the election in terms of towards Donald Trump, whether that's true or not, or whether they tried to swing it towards Hillary Clinton, that either one of those may be true, and I don't know how effective they've been. But the main thing that's in Russia's interest is to divide America and to keep America getting more and more angry at itself. That is the number one goal of Russia. It's the number one goal of China. It's the number one goal of Iran. It's the number one goal of all of our enemies, is to make sure that the country continues to feel more and more animosity towards their fellow citizens. And they can accomplish this by limiting the amount of outside information that we get, so that the information that we perceive coming to us more or less freely is in fact a very narrow pathway towards an abattoir. And that's what they want us to walk down. And this.
Now, you spoke French there. I think you're going to have to define that for our younger listeners.
Yeah, an abattoir is a place where you kill animals. At
a slaughterhouse.
Yeah, it's a slaughterhouse, preferably one with rotating knives. But in any event, for you Monty Python fans out there, in any event, this is in their interest, and this is certainly being accomplished. There's a tremendous video for Yuri something or other. I mentioned this before. He was interviewed in the 1970s, a KGB defector who basically said in late 60s, early 70s on television, I've got the clip. He basically says, here's what we tried to do with America, and this happened and took us 20 years to do this. This was much faster than we thought, and all of the steps are there, and all of them are plainly visible in hindsight. And ultimately, Scott, when you get to the ultimate question about this, what it comes down to for me is there is no question that we are susceptible to this. None. There's no question that if you look at it from a sheer strategic point of view, it is a vulnerability in the American system, and it's a vulnerability in democracies to be able to have that kind of influence on the public, and the public makes the decisions. It is an enormous chink in the system, and it's something we need to be aware of. But my main point here is this: the only societies that are not susceptible to this kind of influence are closed societies like Russia and China and Iran. And so the question is, does the liability of the ability to influence a free population, does that liability outweigh the strengths of a free population? And my solid answer is no. The reason that the Russians and the Chinese are trying to influence, and everyone else are trying to influence American elections and sow division in America, is because of the strength of the American system. And the American system's strength is predicated upon open exchange of information and fundamental trust. I agree with you completely, 100%, that the serious damage is not so much the political damage for one side or another, but the erosion of that trust and the erosion of that sense of fellowship and the erosion of that kind of handshake at the end of the game, in the 50-yard line.
I feel like we need the old-fashioned wartime propaganda poster with, a stern-looking Uncle Sam on it, pointing at you and saying, "Love your neighbor, don't be Putin's Patsy." Or
there
something
you go.
Like that.
Love that. Yeah, exactly. Love that right-wing Nazi knuckle-dragging anti-science idiot, or find a way to feel genuine affection for that weak beta man-child idiot who simply believes the most puerile emotional arguments that are stuck under their nose because they have no self-esteem and a desire to feel good. Yeah,
I'm not sure
posters
that's
like
helpful.
This may not be my strong suit.
Ladies and gentlemen, your strong suit has been enjoying programming like this and supporting programming like this. If you're a member at BillWhittle.com, we're grateful for that. If somehow you have not yet availed yourself of the benefits of membership, you can do that by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking the big green Become a Member button. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.